Welcome to the next podcast from Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Millinery.Info, where we welcome milliners from across the globe into your ears and studio. For this episode, we welcome Serena Lindeman onto the podcast. Serena has taught many milliners that have graduated from Kangan Institute in Melbourne, including myself. For her own work, she's based in the iconic Nicholas building, where she creates stunning pieces for race days and develops flat pattern hats for men. Thank you to our wonderful podcast sponsors for their support of this series: Hat Academy, Hatblocks Australia, Millinery Australia, Hatters Millinery Supplies, House of Adorn, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Be Unique Millinery, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, and the Hat Magazine. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes. That's either in your podcast app or on our website, where you can also find a gallery of images that relate to this episode. Have you been enjoying the Millinery.Info series? A way to say thank you and to help us to keep bringing you this fantastic content is to become a Patreon of Millinery.Info. There are 3 different tiers available, and the first one is as little as a coffee a month when you listen to the new episode. If you'd like to show your support, head over to patreon.com/Millinery.Info. I hope you enjoy this episode with Serena. Thank you so much, Serena, for having me in your lovely studio in the Nicholas building today. It's lovely to have you.
Eh?
It's lovely to have you
Well,
on our
it's
podcast.
it's lovely that you came and you were super punctual. You were exactly on time. So that's one of the things I know about you.
I think a lot of people know you. You have taught many wonderful milliners in Melbourne, but I'd love to hear about your story and how did you first become involved in millinery?
Wow, that goes right back to the early 1990s, believe it or not. It feels like maybe a month ago. I was living in London. I'd been a secondary art teacher, first of all up in country Victoria and then in South London, and I thought I was leaving school and I'm here again at school, and I thought I'd like to investigate some creative avenue of production, and there was, I can't remember the name of the local adult learning outfits, and there was a millinery class that I liked the look of, and there was a couple of others. Anyway, long and short, I went to my first millinery class thinking, we've got a lot of sun in Australia and people will need hats, and I can make them, learn how to make them, and then go home to Australia and make hats. Well, guess what, Lauren? The first hat I made was a flat pattern hat, and I thought, okay, this is all right. And then I blocked a felt hat, and I thought, I'm sure there's more to it than this. Yep. And I ended up at London College of Fashion, and there was a professional development course, and it was taught by a lady called Susie Hopkins. And Susie Hopkins used to work for, which milliner? I can't remember. Philip Somerville it was. Mm-hmm. And she was very brusque and bright and breezy and fabulously full of character. Yeah. And I latched on and I really loved it, and I met some amazing people there, and I kept re-enrolling and repeating classes. And there's a millinery and fabric shop in the West End of London called McCulloch and Wallace. And I was in McCulloch and Wallace. I don't know what I was buying, but I was there. And they had this notice board. And this was all before all the internet and everything. So connections were a bit harder to form, or a bit less instantaneous. Yeah. And there was an ad there from a milliner called Edwina Ibbotson. And I thought, okay. She wanted an assistant part-time, yes, casual. And I thought, maybe this is my next step. So I took some things. I had an appointment. I took some things around, and I can remember to this day what she said when she saw my work. She said, "I can see that you're really enthusiastic, and I thought, I think I can read the subtext in that. And what I think I heard was, I can see you love what you're doing, but you're not quite good enough. Anyway, long and short, she took me on, and she said, forget everything that you've learned, I'll show you how I do things.
Yes.
And I hope she'll forgive me if I describe her as something of a perfectionist. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I am so fond of her, the person, and so fond of the work that she made me do and undo and sometimes redo 3 times and all of the above.
Yeah.
Because that perfectionism lifted me from being okay to being a bit better. And I did, I think, 3 seasons with Edwina, and in between times I was doing a bit of supply teaching or emergency teaching in schools just to make ends meet. And I did get myself a studio in North London where I was then living, and so I bought a few hat blocks and you know, did some millinery on my own account. And you know, I felt like by the time that all came to an end that I was heading in the right direction. I had a bit of confidence. I kind of knew a lot of how to make Edwina Ibbotson hats, and I thought, and I applied some of those skills to making some Serena Lindeman hats. And as you well know, working under the guidance of someone who's really strong in their design aesthetic, sometimes you have to create some distance to actually get it back in touch with your own ideas. And so there came a time when I thought, right, I need to take the next step. Where will I do it? And I thought, maybe it's time to leave London and come back to Australia. And this building, the Nicholas building, there was a room that I found, and I was homesick for London because I'd been over there for 7 years or so. And I just, you know, I thought, what the hell am I doing back here? I really like it better over there. Anyway, I moved into this building, and the reason I really warmed to being in here was because it felt like a little bit of the Rabbit Warren effect. But also, looking out the window, I was on the south side, I could see the dome of Flinders Street Station, and to me that was emblematic of all the domes that you know too well are in London. And in some way that was a little bit of a touchstone for me of going, oh, come on, you'll settle in. And I did, of course I settled in. And the other thing, every time I'd go down to the bay and I'd ride a bicycle or walk along the bay, I thought, you can't get Port Phillip Bay in London. And, you know, I was busy trying to find the reasons, but that I loved my time in London. It was a really exciting decade. There was so much going on. It was so exciting. I was putting nasty little marks of my nose on the windows of some of the most amazing milliners I've ever encountered. And I'll name check Philip Tracy, and I'll name check Stephen Jones, and I admire them both to this day, but also heaps of others. And I'd go to exhibitions, and, you know, I really soaked up what I could there. And the long and short of it is, when I got back, I thought, right, I know what I'll do. I'll make a collection, and I think I made about a dozen pieces. Yeah. And I had a photographer next door to me, and she organised a photo shoot for me, which was lovely. The model came in, and she was this absolutely, like, I just looked at her and I thought, oh, Sue, I'm not sure about this. Anyway, the minute the makeup and the hair was done, I thought, oh my God, Serena, don't judge, never judge. She looked amazing. And we put the hats on her head, and we took the photos, and I thought, yeah, I'm a milliner here. I know what I'm doing with this millinery life.
I know how to do this hat thing.
Yeah. Anyway, we entered her, or she entered, wearing one of my hats in Fashions on the Field. And she won the Classic Hat Award, the first.
Straight off the bat.
Thank you. And what that did, and I'll admit it now because it's 22 years Hence, it gave me a little bit of a leap in respect. And I suspect if I'd done all my learning and made all my mistakes over here, people would have known me and perhaps placed me in a slightly different category. But it was great for my confidence. And I remember Janice Breen Burns, in the Age, where she wrote at the time, said that the hat by Serena Lindeman oozed effortless chic. And I just, oh God, I wore that like a badge. I even feel a bit prickly right now. It's like, I want to ooze effortless chic every day. It's a bit like my friend Dizzy Downs, when I lived in London, said, you must meet my friend Stephen Jones. He could tie a bow that would break your heart. And I thought, yes, I have aspirations. That's the sort of bow I want to tie. That is the bow I want to tie. I want to ooze effortless chic, and I want to tie bows that will break people's heart. And so on I went, and I just quietly slogged away. And as every milliner who will ever hear this, they'll know what that means. It means you're walking around the table, you're trying to come up with something new, you're throwing things over your shoulder, you're making messes and tidying them up, and you're coveting blocks that you'd like to use to make the most amazing hats that are in your head, and all of that. And then some couple of years after I got back, I found out that there was a job at Kangan, as you well know, and that they were looking for a millinery teacher. And at that stage, you know and I know that millinery is so jolly seasonal that I needed to earn money in between the seasons to keep body and soul together. And so I went and applied for the job, and I guess, that was, they said, yes, we'll have you teach part-time. It was a sessional position, and I've taught there with, all sorts of wonderful people, and every encounter and every year there'd be some new set of challenges. And I think because I'm a bit stubborn and because I will put up with nonsense to a certain extent, and people don't set out to be tricky, but sometimes they can be, and I just do my best to accommodate that and keep them going, and that includes colleagues and students, although I won't name them here. And so and I feel like I've contributed, I hope I have anyway, to people's development. And some people came to do millinery because they had very stressful jobs, and back in the day the government would pay practically everything for people to do these courses. And so I got some really interesting people, like people who were nurses and who just needed to be creative, or people who were working as PAs and just wanted to do something that was about themselves for 3 hours a week, and also not and some that really wanted to go on and be professional milliners, and I've had lots of rewarding thoughts about that in the past as well. And as you and I both know, if you went through the membership of the Millinery Association of Australia, you'd see a lot of people who I recognise from their formative years. So I've tried my very best to keep my professional practice running parallel to that, and it's my source of joy, but it's also my credentialing for that teaching role. And it's super important to be able to say, well, yes, from experience I can tell you this or that. And I won't pretend that my students haven't taught me interesting things. Like sometimes they'll ask something and I'll say, oh, how about we try to do it this way? And often I'll go, oh, I didn't know that. Sometimes it's solutions that they've found and they've brought in and they've said, and I think, oh, that's an interesting way of doing it. Let's give that some more attention. And also there's been new materials coming in, new techniques, and we've had such an amazing run of interstate and international milliners coming and doing various short courses and workshops and so on. And as part of my PD for my teaching, I've shown up at those classes, and it's really, really good value to be on the other side of the table and be a student and sit at the feet of somebody and learn from them. So I've enjoyed that side of it as well. Does that answer that question?
Yes, and I have so many more questions out of that.
I think I just told you my whole career.
I love it. No, I know it was something I was thinking about, because you started in London, which is such an interesting place and then to come back home, but with a new career. And you would have known London millinery and the British style quite well, having learnt it. When you got back to Australia and you immersed yourself in Melbourne, what was the difference like in the type of hats you were making?
Oh my goodness. Probably not so much difference in what I was making, but if you were to characterise the British or English style of millinery beside the Australian style, I think Australian millinery, and to this day, could be characterised with the sense of adventure, the exuberance, the sometimes over the top kind of aspect. Probably more so in the late 90s and early 2000s than today. I think Australian millinery today is very it's leading in its own way. I think when I first came back, there was a lot of referring back to England, and it was really interesting because it was just when the internet was coming, and a lot of people who had the internet didn't realise that other people did too. and some of them got caught out a little bit with that. But, that's all fair in love and war. And I think one of the things that I've really pushed in my teaching and hopefully in my own personal practice as well is that the best milliners in this town, they don't follow, they create. And even to the extent that they might see somebody else making something that they thought they might, and then they might shift it a little bit so that they're creating their own niche. And sure, there's trends, there's things that a lot of people do, but I think, by and large, people are really looking to their own design inspirations and going back and making collections, dare I say, and that is something that really comes straight from that training in the third year of the millinery course, where you design a collection. And if you look at the best of the international milliners, they design collections, and they'll keep some themes and drop some themes and update every year, but they follow their own creative direction. They don't follow somebody else's.
It's an evolution to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I mean, I look at some of the hats I've made 20 years ago and I'm thinking, if I was to make something to fit that niche, it probably wouldn't be that different. And at one stage I used to think, oh God, that's terrible. I need to think up something new. But, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years for the public to catch up with an idea, and sometimes I'll have a hat sitting on the table for a little while, and then someone will come along and go, I love it, I want it.
And having learnt from Edwina, what were some of the things that you maybe kept, or the things that you consciously evolved in your own style and aesthetic from that?
One of the things that Edwina would do is she'd build a hat from the ground up. So she'd start with undyed, unprepared materials, and she'd work from scratch. She wouldn't use like a pre-made anything.
Not even pre-dyed.
Not
normally.
Yeah, she would dye. She would dye her feathers. She would dye, if she was making flowers, she'd dye the silk. She would use the best quality of materials, and so when the hat came together, it was sometimes very laborious. And one of the things that I don't think we can afford that luxury here in Australia so much, because we do not have the type of client that would pay the money that it takes to pay for all of that. And so I have to say did have to streamline some of my practices. And I love dyeing stuff, and it comes from her, but it also comes from my art background, that I love. I love that sort of sense of you start with a formless mass, and you bring order into that, and you create something that someone, I hope, would reach for and say, yes, I can see myself wearing it. There was somewhere along the line that I realised that I was in the fashion industry, and I never thought I'd be in the fashion industry. I thought it was all a bit superficial. But to be honest, I love it. I think I have a fairly healthy relationship with it. But I do really, I think the respect that we have for the way a designer can relate to the human body, adorn the human body is, and it's interesting that the NGV has got an exhibition on at the moment of Alexander McQueen, and there's been lots of other fashion exhibitions, and it's been treated as art, and I think that's really evolved. Certainly when I was training, it seemed like there was a chasm between, but not so much these days.
And does the art background that you have, does that still encroach or support what you make?
Remember how I used to say, take inspiration from outside millinery? That came straight from my art background. And I think one of the most simple formulae for coming up with ideas is to find something that you find engaging outside your practice. You investigate it, you experiment with it, dare I say, you draw, and you manipulate, and then bring that back in. And it's almost like, cutting out this and cutting out that and putting them together in ways that haven't been seen before. And that sort of comes through in, I've spent a lot of time loving origami, and I found that I went through a stage, and I think it was around about 2003, where I was doing a lot of pleating and folding, and that was pure referencing back to what I just said to you about putting things together in unexpected ways.
Is designing and producing a collection still part of how you practice your millinery today?
Has to be. And at the moment, it's a little bit outside what I initially was doing, but at the moment I'm working on a collection of made in Melbourne pieces for men for Fashion Week. And I'm working with several other businesses. I don't know as much as I should about exactly where it's going, but I'm really looking forward to producing some things that aren't mass-produced, that are made, if not to order, then certainly made in the this workroom. I have a friend of mine who's an ex-student, and she used to refer to herself as the slow hat movement. Well, I'm not exactly the slow. Remember the slow food movement, and the slow this and the slow that? I think there's something to be really respected in that. It's that sort of, step by step and building something again from the ground up, and that sort of concept comes back to me from time to time. And I know there's a lot of disdain for pre this or pre that. I do like the idea of building things from not much.
Okay. And you won in 2006.
God,
the
you're good.
VRC hosted the Millinery Award for the
very first
time.
one.
And you won.
I did.
What was it like to enter? Did you? It's gone on to become quite a renowned competition. But
look,
what was that first experience
like?
It's a really
interesting thing. When I did the piece that I made, I just refer back to that origami, that folding that I was doing. And I created a piece that I could still find it somewhere here. And I think it wasn't a terribly long lead up that I had, but I borrowed this absolutely beautiful silk satin dress from Barbara Wilson, and I had a parade with and my friend Christopher Horn, the dearly departed Christopher Horn, organised my parade for me, and he got me, I think, half a dozen models, and including a beautiful woman called Silvana Lovin. And she, every time she put anything on her head and walked out, I couldn't stop looking at her. And I don't know what it was just some kind of factor, and I just thought, well, if I'm going to put something in this award, I want her to be my model. And so I went to her agency and I hired her.
Yes.
She's now Silvana Philippoussis. She's married to a tennis player, bless her, and is a very beautiful and lovely mum of 2 little children. And so I had Barbara Wilson's dress, I had Silvana Lovin, I had the hat. I think I borrowed some pearls from the Gray and Reed in Collins Street, and I might have bought the shoes. I can't remember where the shoes came from. And I thought, well, that's my best shot. I'll put all that together and
see how she goes.
Yes, exactly. So I took her out, and I remember walking along just a little bit behind her, and she cut this swathe, and the people, and they were just looking at her, and I thought, this is good, this is fun, this is really
even
nice.
If I don't win, it's still a good day.
Exactly. And when I arrived at the sort of area, because it was, before we had all the different manifestations of the space at the VRC, I remember Richard Nylon, whose opinion I value very much, just looked at me and he said, oh, well, you've won. And I thought, well, you're not the judge, but we'll see. And so I think they filtered it down from, I don't know how many, to maybe 30 there was in that, to 10. And I came into the final 10. And there might have been 2 filter downs. And I was still in, and I thought, oh, this is good. And then they announced, how they announced the third
3,
prize.
2.
Yeah. And I thought, well, I've either bummed out or I haven't, I've won. And I won. And it was just the most exciting feeling. And I thought, this is easy. I win these things. I'm really good. And so that's my ego at work there. Anyway, so it was really exciting. And I kind of... The winning got a little bit lost because we didn't get great photos. There was not a lot of great photos. And so, it's 2003, it's nearly 20, no, what did we say? 2006. So it's getting to be a while ago. And so, but all of that stuff, it just gives you such a boost. And I know every single person who's won it since, I just feel so pleased for them, a little bit jealous, but mostly pleased. And I just know that it benefits your career. It benefits the way you see yourself and the way you credential yourself, because it really does count. And it gives you attention and it gives you opportunities that otherwise you wouldn't have. And so I did enter there for several years afterwards, and whether they just put a little note on my thing saying, don't let her get
she's already had it. She's had a go.
And I think now they even have a rule that says if you've won it previously, you're not to enter, which I'm not totally sure that's good. I know Liza Steadman won twice, and good and well done her.
Yes.
And anyway, I think there's been some really great winnings. One of the things that concerns me about it a little bit is that sometimes I think it veers into costume a little, and it loses touch with fashion, and, you know, I say that with the greatest of caution.
Yes.
But I know that if everybody wants attention, you have to really ride that line. You have to ride the line between something that a woman would put on, a real woman would put on, and something that will catch the judge's attention. And so, you know, there's a lot of imagining what the judges will be thinking and what the judges will be looking for, and possibly second-guessing yourself a little bit. I think it's really hard. I think it's very, very competitive. And I have to say, when I stopped entering, because I did a little while ago, and I used to go and watch every time, and I'd see all these really hopeful entrants, and I could genuinely say, I hope you win, to people, where I wasn't being genuine before that, because I go, oh,
I want to win.
because I'd be so, you know, I wouldn't relax until they'd announced.
Yes.
Because you know, you don't enter a competition like that. I mean, it's quite a big investment of time and energy and money, without wanting to be the one that wins. And you don't make a hat that you don't think is the best.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really understand why we try so hard, because it's a bit like, I'm sure drugs are like that. You know, it's like, oh my God, I feel fabulous. I'm so fabulous. But it's a high that you didn't have to take in physical ways. It's just there.
And if I remember your piece correctly, it featured gorgeous, was it raffia flowers?
Oh no, that was the one that came third a couple of years later.
Which is the one that came first?
The one that came first was a coral-coloured spiral piece with little mustard-coloured pleated spiral, similar technique.
Yes.
And set on a sort of a, well, it was actually a Dior beret. It was I bought. Oh, where did I get that block? Anyway, Boone and Lane made my first few blocks, and then I started getting blocks here, and I'm so pleased that we've got Daryl at Hat Blocks Australia, because he's just amazing. His blocks are beautiful. In fact, I've been working on one of them this morning. Anyway, long and short, yes, I blocked that button base. The next one was more of a headband, and then I made those raffia flowers, and I made the flowers using wire work, and then did this. It wasn't even raffia; it was a synthetic raffia, so the colours were very vibrant, and the material was quite lustrous and beautiful, and it was based on some fabric that I'd found in a bag. It was a terrible bag, but the fabric was divine, and it was in the op shop up at the top end of Burke Street, and I hadn't even thought about this for years, but it was in the Salvation Army op shop. It's no longer there, but they had an op shop, and I saw this bag, and it was terrible, but the fabric was amazing, so I just covered this little headband base. I think I've still got that one somewhere, and I'd sewn all the wired flowers on, and then I thought, oh, you know what? There's not enough flowers, and I was, after the thing was finished, I stitched a whole lot of extra flowers on, and to this day I haven't the stitches were showing through the lining, but I thought, can't be bothered with that. They're only going to look at the outside. Yeah. So, but that one came third, and that was as close as I ever got to winning again after that. So that was humbling in that I thought, I've got the knack with this. But of course, got it. Yeah. And of course, pride comes before the fall, doesn't it?
And when you were going to enter all your, were you looking to innovate something you'd already done, or did you design something specifically just for those?
Well, the interesting thing about the spiral pleating, that was something that I'd been using, but I just larged it up a little bit. and with the raffia fabric, it was a cream dupion silk, and it had a colourful synthetic raffia embroidery into it, and I thought I could take that and make it three-dimensional by creating little trim wire frames and then weaving the raffia into the frames. And I made a bow, and I made a whole lot of different style of flowers, some pointy petals and some little rounded ones. And then I had lots of different colours and lots of like it was quite a profusion.
Yeah.
And that one, actually, I think there's a photo of that one behind me. There. That one went on a beautiful model. Her name, here we are. Her name was Jade Pomeroy, and she was a daughter of some friends of my sister, but she was with an agency, so I went through the agency to hire her. But that was the piece that she was wearing, and I can't remember the name of the label of the dress, but I actually bought the dress. I loved it. I don't even know where that is now. But you can see a little bit of the base there. So that was the thing that launched the concept of that. And I have taught that technique at a couple of millinery conventions, and I've seen people use it, but it's quite time consuming. And of course, the Australian woman doesn't necessarily want to pay a fortune for her hats, unfortunately.
And we're here in your studio in the Nicholas building. Is this the original space you're in, or have you shifted around the building?
I've been I started off on level 5 in a shared space, and then a friend of mine who's an artist had this room. I'm in room 2 on level 6, and she had this room, and I thought, I like this room, and I love looking out onto Swanston Street, so I moved to this one. And then for a period of time I expanded to the room next door as well.
Yes.
But eventually I had to contract to fit myself back into here, because I'm sure, as you well know, rising rents in the city have really meant that a lot of us have had to rethink our space requirements. And that's a bit of a pity. I think I was in a lucky patch where there was lots of creativity in the building, and lots of space, and the rents were manageable. So those days are a little bit gone, sadly.
And your block collection is around us.
Yeah.
So did you bought some back from London?
I bought a few back from London, but I can't. In fact, to be honest with them, they're kind of a bit dated now. My favourite blocks are either blocks that I've bought from either vintage blocks, or blocks that I bought from Hat Blocks Australia or whatever over the years. And also, I don't know if you remember, did I teach you how to make a block using DAS?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. There's a bit of that action as well, because I've come from an art background.
Yes.
I've applied some of the sculpting skills to making shapes, because I know one of the ways of creating an original piece can often start with a shape that you might not be able to see in every workroom, and I think those points of difference are really valuable.
Yeah. And do you have customers come into because it's very much a workspace, but do you have customers come into the space for consultation or to try pieces on? How does that engagement work?
Look, I try and keep the place a little bit tidy for that very reason. Actually, yes, they do. They come for consultations here, and particularly during the spring season, but I'll get a scattering of wonderful clients between. I had a stunning bride, and it was kind of fun because she wanted a sort of a floppy bow to go in her hair. I think I should put some of the photos up on my Instagram.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, she was wearing this amazing gown with a I don't think there was any straps on it, and it was a beautifully structured gown. And I thought I was going to make it out of gazar, which is one of my all-time favourite fabrics, and it didn't quite work. And I went to my favourite one of my favourite fabric shops up the hill, to Suti, and I found the fabric, but it was exactly No, I didn't go to Suti that time. I went to Tyler's in Cremorne Street, and he had that same fabric that the gown was made of. The fabric has a really crisp aspect, and she wanted a really floppy bow. So here am I with the steamer trying to make it look floppy. But what happened, I sewed and you and I both know that you don't tie bows in millinery, you construct them. Yeah. And I was really reflecting on that so much when I was putting this together. And I was stitching the two loop sides together so that they formed that V shape, so that they looked like they were just dropping down. And they weren't just sitting up like little perky little loops. Anyway, when the photos came back, I was so delighted, because I got a lovely message from her as well. But, I felt like I'd met the brief. Actually, one of the things that I insist my students do, and they don't take me seriously and I don't take myself seriously either, is to keep a spec sheet of everything that you put in your hat, all your costs and all your times, and then you work out how much it costs, because you need to predict when a client comes in to order something, you need to predict what they need to pay you. Well, hello, I kind of do it some of the time, but perhaps not as well as I should.
I say not as I do.
Yeah, that's my advice to any milliner, including myself, is to do your costings, like really stay on those costings, because you need to not be a charity for people who are more wealthy than you are. And, if someone comes to a milliner, they've got everything else they need, and you need to know that, and you need to not be trying to give something for value that's lower than your time, because you will resent them if you do, and you will you'll be kicking yourself, and you don't need to be kicked.
Absolutely. So you mentioned there in teaching, you've been teaching Kangan for a number of years. How has how you've taught, or the types of things you deliver, changed?
Oh, that's interesting. I changed a lot. Once upon a time, I used to be able to teach all the people the same thing at the same time. I would demonstrate. I often wouldn't finish the piece, but I'd demonstrate the stages to the students, and then I could help them progress their work. And these would be in classes of, up to 15, 16 people, and, no fewer than a dozen. Over the years, the numbers have dropped, and now I have one class where I have 2 stages at the same time. And during the pandemic, I built a lot of online resources, which have only been available to my Kangan students, because there's a way that you can put things onto YouTube where you have to have the link. You can't just go and search the skill, it's hidden. And so, given that that's the intellectual property of Kangan, that's all hidden. And so what I would do is, in class, and this would be, for whatever reason, you may not have all the students in the class at the same time. So I would give my phone, the little amazing camera phone, to one of the students, and I'd say, you focus on the thing that is of most interest to you. So they would look at your hands while they were working, and you could get a a video describing, and I'd be talking them through at the same time. And then I could post that up onto YouTube and put the link into their online learning platform. So when the pandemic hit, we had to get everything onto online instantaneously. It was the most amazing effort. And, you know, it was the thing that we were all saying, oh, yes, we really must do that one day. Oh, yes, because it was all ready to happen.
Yes.
But, of course, what the pandemic did was it just said, well, if you don't do it, you're dead.
Forced in hand.
That's it. You've got nothing. You can't teach without the technology. And that was one of the things that I would reflect on. We were so lucky that we didn't have the pandemic before we had all the technology, because we would have been so isolated.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't teach over the telephone. I had sound and I had vision, and I had the ability with my phone to make videos. I had put them into YouTube. Everything was there. All the resources were there. And I think you know and I know that Pinterest pages were so valuable.
Yes.
And being able to say, well, look at the examples that I've collected and put in that Pinterest page. That'll help you understand. And in fact, I just had a student say, what's this Spice Bream business? What's that look like? And I was able to refer her to a particular photo and say, look at that one there, half made, and it has the advantage of being able to cross the headlight on the bias all the way around, and as you obviously don't have when you're blocking flat. And she wrote back and said, yeah, I get it. I know what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So you know, there's so many ways. I don't have to have my hand in every single thing. Although that said, now I'm really insisting that unless there's a really good reason, they come to class, because there's nothing like watching a student in the classroom if they're not holding something properly, or they're doing something in an awkward way, or not using their thimble. You can say, hey, listen, if you go in the direction towards your holding hand, it's going to be so much more easy.
That's life-changing, that comment, I have to say. I think of you every time I hand soap.
Well,
because it's something that you wouldn't have seen us do, hold things the wrong way. I know some people sew differently, but you wouldn't have been able to offer that correction.
No.
That's improved so many of us.
And the reality is, when people are doing things at home, having watched the video, you can't be entirely sure that they're doing it in the most ergonomic way. They're not doing it in a way that's going to damage them by creating, cricks and snicks in their back or whatever. And I'm really one of the things about the course is that I didn't really even think about this terribly much until I started teaching safety and workplace safety, but using the right posture and using the right equipment and the PPE, the protective stuff, and taking breaks, and all of the things that I now just build into what I teach, because if you're going to do this for the long haul, you don't want to end up with a bad back or repetitive injury, that sort of thing. So safety is important.
Very important. And what's some of the key skills or wisdom that you hope that your students will take away from a class with you or a course with you?
One of the things that I think is really central is, I gave you a stitch menu, didn't I? I've had that thing for ages, and I've given a list of stitches, a little diagram of each one showing what they are and telling you where they're used. And I think if you feel confident that you know what stitches you're going to use to do a certain thing, it's really good. And so I think that gives people the confidence that they need. But the other thing, and this is something that we've done a little bit more recently, we have a photo shoot with Richard Shaw, the photographer, and he comes in, the students hire a model, we has set up, or Richard sets up his screens and gives the students a semi-professional, a professional photo shoot for their work. And one of the units that I teach is about interact with the fashion industry. And I listen to me, I ask them all to make a Pinterest, not Pinterest, what are we called? Instagram page. And I link that to the photo shoot. And so it's about, third year at Kangan for me, and hopefully for my students, is to get them heading in that direction that they can work towards professional practice. And one of the other things that I really encourage them to do, because I know when you're a student, you can get your legs under the table of some really good milliners, and if they've got the time, and not all of them do, to go and put themselves at the feet of at some of the other milliners in town as well.
Yeah, some work experience.
Yeah, and that's to me, it's all about the networking as well.
Yeah. What's a project you're working on at the moment that you're looking forward to?
Well, I kind of referred to that previously with the men's collection that I'm doing, and I've actually even thought, well, I have a website, and I find it a useful thing to have because it helps me structure my thinking and my offerings. But I've always neglected the men's hats there, and so there's a space available and ready, and I'm thinking, that might be a thing that I'm working on at the moment. I now have 3 days a week in my studio. Last year I had less, and I was not making the time very easily to spend time in here. So I was doing a bit more millinery in reaction to what people wanted. Yeah. But now I'm doing millinery in order to lay a trail of breadcrumbs to my door. And hopefully, you know that story. Hopefully I can build new aspects to my business and pay more attention to strengthening my business this year. So that's something that I'm very much looking forward to. I know racewear is really important, and it's ever evolving, as you well know. It's wonderful to see that the hats have become smaller, more elegant. I'd still love to see people wearing more hats on a day-to-day basis, but I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, really. But I do, I love the characters and the people that I meet when I'm talking millinery. I find it's endlessly engaging. Looking at the networks, and one of the things that I used to say when I was teaching is you are going to find yourself making friends for life from coming here, and I would do my best to just gently attempt to foster that sort of bonding in the group, because I knew that you'd come to class if you knew your friends were there. So I'd make that an important thing. And making hats in your studio can be quite isolating. And if you have a network of friends that you can lend blocks, you can feed off each other, ask each other for feedback. You can, if someone needs a few metres of this or that, then that's all there. And with that in mind, the Millinery Association of Australia, I've watched that over the years, and I think that was really amazing during the lockdowns, creating that sort of support for each other. And beg your pardon.
Where were we?
When David interrupted us with his...
Where were we cracking
Now, that's
away?
one of the things that I do, as it happens. Yes. I have a Kubra... I'm on the Kubra website, have been forever. And I replace the sweatbands and I replace the bands. One of the things that I like about doing it is that I get to meet some really interesting people, and the relationships that they have with their hat. Like that chap was on the phone, wanted me to patch holes. Well, there's certain things you can and can't do with repairing hats, but to respectfully make the hat so it's still got life in it. And one of the things that I also do is I say, please don't hold your hat by the point of the crown. Use 2 hands and hold the brim, and you will extend the life of your hat by several years. So, I'm ever the bossy school teacher.
I love it. I
think we're done. We had enough fun.
We've had so much fun. Thank you so much for having me here in your studio.
It's a real delight. And if anybody listening's wondering why we're having such a friendly time, I know Lauren reasonably well because I taught her at Kangan. And I can remember, I'll tell you a secret. It's a secret on you, Lauren. Lauren did a hat for me, and I can't remember which one it was. And in those days, we used to do graded assessments, and I used to dish out, lots of grades, and I used to hate doing it because, I want to give everyone a high distinction. Anyway, I think I might have given you a credit or something. Yes, exactly. You heard that sharp intake of breath. And she came up to me and she said, "So, what does it take to get a distinction around here?" And I had to explain in very great detail and justify my decision. And that was one of the things that I really respect and love about you, is that you didn't just settle for okay, you wanted it to be wonderful. And you've gone from strength to strength in your millinery, and I've really enjoyed watching that.
Oh, thank you.
And it didn't do any harm that you spent a number of years working with Louise, did it?
Well, that was all thanks to the Kangan work experience, so I wouldn't have had the chances to do what I've done without coming to that course and meeting you and having the opportunities that course gave. Yeah.
And you had paid employment there for a number of years before you branched out on your own.
Yes.
Didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough industry, but it's the rewards are quite amazing, really. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Millinery.Info with Serena. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, along with the rest of our series. Thank you to our wonderful podcast sponsors for their support. Hatblocks Australia, The Hat Magazine, Louise McDonald Milliner, Lifted Millinery, Be Unique Millinery, Hats by Lico, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, House of Adorn, Hatter's Millinery Supplies, Milliner Australia, and Hat Academy. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes. That's either in your podcast app or on our website. Would you like to hear your business name mentioned here? You could become a Patreon sponsor of Millinery.Info. If you head over to patreon.com/Millinery.Info, you can find out about this, along with the 2 other tiers that are a way of showing your support and to say thank you as you listen to this episode. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Millinery.Info, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.